Hello everyone and welcome to the Demographicast. I am joined today by Kathryn Grassu and Brett Lee.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about young people's relationships with sex and young people's view on relationships. This is something that has been interesting to you and me, Brett, for a while. We've had lots of conversations about this.
We have.
My interest mainly was sparked. I watched a documentary, I can't remember the name of it now, but it follows young people in America when they're on spring break. And I watched it in my second year of university. And it follows a group of guys and a group of girls. And they talk about their experiences and the pressures that they feel when being away on something as mental as spring break. And it got me thinking a lot about my personal relationship with sex and just kind of our generation's view of it. And I think it's a topic that doesn't really get discussed too much, but has quite a lot of impact on us.
Absolutely.
Obviously, every generation is going to have a different view of this, but for us, I think we have a particularly unique point of view because of the way that society is structured at the moment and the kinds of expectations that are on young people.
Specifically, that I think young people are sort of encouraged to be more sexually liberated. And it's almost suggested that we are sexually liberated as a society, but I don't think that's quite true.
First of all, go on.
Well, I haven't really heard that. I mean, as a woman, you don't really get a lot of "you are sexually liberated" as a message. You know, we tend to get "you're too sexually liberated" or "you're not sexually liberated enough," and very little in between.
I think there's also not been clarification as to what sexual liberation actually is.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, and this is not the definition I think is used to define sexual liberation, but to me, sexual liberation is having a positive and free view of how you want to conduct your sexual relationships. And I do not think that we have that at all. So I don't think that we're particularly sexually liberated. I don't think that a conservative view of sex, i.e. having sex only once you're married, or a kind of more modern view of sex of having sex with lots of people defines sexual liberation.
No.
I don't think either of those things
Absolutely
are. If you're choosing to do either of those things, to me that is sexual liberation. If you're choosing to conduct yourself, if you're saying I have the right to only have sex after I'm married, then to me that is sexual liberation. And we live in a society where that is allowed, or vice versa.
I also think that sexual liberation involves this process of talking about it in public, or not in public, not out on the street necessarily, but as with friends, as with family, like just being more open about it and being more educated about it should be a part of that.
Having a healthy
definition.
relationship with it.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
I think we need to define our terms a little bit better. I think we need to go back to the root of human sexuality and the ideas that we've formed the basis of our sexuality on not being scientifically accurate anymore. So things like all of these Darwinian kind of assumptions about like either the difference between men and women in their attitudes to sex, there's no biological basis for that, or lots of things that people have sort of heard about. And it's just quite interesting when people find out the facts for the first time, and people had never heard, for example, that humans aren't actually supposed to be monogamous, and that serial monogamy is something that we saw in other apes that we aren't directly descended from, and thought it looked alright, but really for thousands of years we're mostly like bonobos, which are, they are still group animals, but they raise each other's young, and there's no sort of issue of paternity certainty. Paternity certainty is like the spanner in the works of prehistory, when everything was fine, everyone just lived in a village and raised each other's children and it didn't matter. And then when you come into property and you come into inheritance, people decided, I only want my inheritance and my money to go to people that are definitely my children. And therefore paternity came in, and then serial monogamy came in, and then the landscape of actually how we think of sex has changed so much from any semblance of an original idea that sometimes I think it's just interesting, before we talk too much about like specific modern context of things to think about the whole picture of human sexuality as something that is widely misunderstood as it is, and that if we say go back within ourselves and go back to examining it from a perspective where we realize we need to be self-aware before we do anything. So it's not about how much you do, how much you don't do, who you do with, as long as you know yourself that you're not getting into traps where you're hurting yourself because you're doing things for attention, or you're not ready, or you're repeating patterns from your childhood and things like that. And I think the key step in any, this doesn't sound very fun, but the key step in any casual sexual relationship is definitely to know yourself before you go into anything, because you shouldn't be looking for things in other people that you need in yourself.
I would argue that that's the case in any form of relationship, whether it be a relationship involving casual sex, or it be an actual committed relationship, or it be a friendship. I think that those are pretty good rules to live your life. But just to quickly go back to what you were saying about looking at it in historical terms, our relationship with sex is very much determined around the societal construct that we have. Not societal construct as in like gender is a societal construct, but societal construct in the way our societies are set up. And like you were saying, that is very much loose in this day and age, and what we haven't done, I don't think, is done a particularly good job of understanding these things in the terms of modern society. Things have moved so quickly. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about TV and social media and magazines and identity. These things have changed so rapidly, and what we haven't done maybe a good enough job of is redefining these terms to fit in with our modern age. We haven't got things like religion was a good way of doing that. Not to say that religion did a good job of setting up healthy relationships, but it defined the terms as to which those things should be conducted.
And it comes back to the question of, do we need rules, or do we just tell ourselves we need rules? Because what we really need is some sort of structure. But where do you take that from other people, or do you build it yourself? And I think something about being liberated as it is the ability to recognize I don't need someone to tell me. I can make that decision, and for the most part I'm quite firmly pro what people want to do. I don't really have a problem with I mean, clearly I don't really have a problem with people having casual sex, and I think it's really interesting once you get to a point in your life that it's like a really interesting way of looking at people that isn't just friendship, relationship, and that it's really interesting to look at people and value one particular quality about them and be like, well, I really want to see how that quality interacts with qualities of mine, but I don't necessarily want to have a relationship with them. And I think it can be, if you're like at a stage where it's kind of interesting and you're going out not for anything in particular, but you're finding people interesting in a way that you couldn't do before, because it's not so clearly defined. It's not like childhood when everyone's either a parent, a sibling, or a friend. You've got it's the grey areas, and that's why I think it can be
curiosity,
a slippery slope for some people, because you can get so stuck. But it's so interesting discovering different things about people, and that's how you get to know what you like, I think, as well, and how much you should know how much you're willing to put up with as well. I think that's quite important.
It's so individual though, isn't it? Because I would say from my experiences that's best being done in relationships, in committed relationships, and not through other avenues. I think that I've found my understanding of what I like, the way that I'm a best sort of person through committed friendships and committed relationships, where you're getting feedback, you're communicating properly, where you're
so you don't think you would have got it from more casual?
I don't think I have done. No, I don't think I think you still learn. I think you still understand. But I think for the sort of person I am, and this is kind of the point that I wanted to make today, was that it's so individual. like most things, it is so grey. The most important thing is that you feel able to discover these things the way you want to, and you don't feel pressured to have to figure your life out through the lens of how other people are living.
Well, because what we know about psychology, in that the way people learn about love and sex and relationships coming from the way they've been loved or lack thereof as a child, and the way that you reconcile that with the way you treat other people as an adult, all comes into that. So I think maybe people find casual things more appealing if they've seen forms of, or they're sick of repeating patterns, or they've seen forms of love that they definitely don't want to repeat from their childhood. So they're kind of cautious to emotionally invest until they're sure that someone isn't going to display a particular quality or a series of qualities that is, well, almost traumatic, really, from some sort of, I mean, all of this can be subconscious as well. This can be absolutely anybody, and you would never know if you have that kind of issue. You would never know. You could go about your entire life being like, why do I keep sleeping with people when I'm not that keen on them? And you can not know. And I feel like it's not right to just leave those people to say, well, you made a choice. I think a lot of it is actually not a choice. In terms of the way you find accessibility in yourself and in other people can be very hard for some people to access themselves or other people in that way, and therefore you might need a structure which is a bit more safe, in air quotes.
But then whilst I well, the way I view it is that the safe thing to do is the casual route. For me, the safe thing is to not commit yourself to somebody. The safe thing is to not put everything on hold for somebody else and form a committed, strong relationship with somebody where you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, you're making the best of your life with them. That, to me, is the risk.
I see that totally the way around.
Right, because I think, like you said, in the last podcast we did, very much a heart on my sleeve person, very emotional, very open to talk about things. First thing is communication. If there's something wrong, I talk about it. I'm not going to hold a grudge. I'm not going to throw a 4-hour tantrum, a 4-hour strop. If there's an issue, let's discuss it. Let's get it out of the way, because life's too short to worry about that stuff. So to me, it's probably easier to kind of stay away from having to put yourself in a situation where there are always going to be problems, there are always going to be issues. The easy thing would be to say, right, I'm never going to commit myself, because then I'd never have to sort out any issues. I'd never be hurt. I'd never have feelings for somebody that are so overwhelming, and I get so caught up. So therefore, I'm just going to remove myself from the possibility of being in that situation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So therefore, I'm going to choose to put myself in that difficult position.
But to me, knowing somebody versus not knowing someone as well, like the person you know better, like if you're in a committed relationship with someone, it's always going to be safer because you know them, you know what they're ultimately capable of. You know them enough to know whether you're safe or not in a very literal sense, and that bleeds into everything else. I feel like emotional safety, where you wouldn't necessarily get that out of either anyway, because ultimately if you're looking for that where you can't face being emotionally intimate with people and you're looking for something else, the sad kind of answer is that you will have to come up against it. It's not going to be one of those things where you can't put it off forever. You do have to deal with it, and you don't have to do like you don't have to have a crisis, you don't have to like do anything massive. It's just about looking within and knowing that.
See, these are the kind of questions I was going to ask, because in terms of how we defined casual sex, do we define it as something we would define it, I suppose, as something that's no strings attached, a relationship that's no strings attached. But is it even a relationship? What happens? Can you have casual sex with somebody without getting emotionally invested in them?
So I think that those relationships, I think those relationships where there are no strings attached. You both say, right, we're just going to sleep with each other and that's it. We're not going to get feelings for each other. Like, you agree, like as if it's got something you've got control over. They are very, very few and far between. I'm not saying that it can't work. I'm not saying that it's never worked, but I think that they are very rare. Where you can do that and then continue being friends with that person afterwards.
Sure.
In my case, I mean, I think that I would struggle, because to me, sex is something that is incredibly personal.
Sure. So you need some kind of investment there in the first
but
place.
also, it's not fun if you don't have feelings for somebody.
I was going to say, to me, absolutely. First off, you just shouldn't be having sex with anybody you don't really like.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how deeply you like them, but if you know that you're just like, I don't really like them, just don't sleep with them. You can, of course you can, but you probably shouldn't, and it won't feel any better. And the way that's not what casual sex means to me in that way. I don't think. Right. I think that's something. I think that's because I think that's where the stigma comes from. When people stigmatize it, they're stigmatizing that. The idea that you're just kind of like meh about everybody that you sleep with and that you never really invest anything. And I think there's another way. It doesn't have to be that or a relationship. And I feel like...
Yeah, there should be some kind of middle ground.
My grey area between those two looks a bit like when you are like emotionally invested, possibly in more than one person at a time, but you're not in a relationship with them, but you're interested in them in a way that is more than just friends. And it's about, if you're like really, really, really interested, then if it's not an issue between the two of you, why wouldn't you just be in a relationship? But I feel like it's important to respect that might not be the best thing for people depending on what they've been through. So to me, the casual sex thing in a way that works looks a bit like, you know, you have a small circle of people, you know, you maybe have like a little string of people that you go and see, but they know about each other, and it's quite regular. Yeah, and it's not necessarily the serial thing, the sleeping with a different person every week. I don't really think about that as the same thing.
Right.
I think that is
the same thing, but I think about that as
casual sex arrangement. I mean, like, it's someone you know, it's someone you trust, you've talked to them a bit.
See, this is what I was going to ask again.
I don't think
you don't think that
hookup culture. I don't think one night stands and hookup culture is the same thing.
I don't think it's the same thing as that, but I wouldn't define what you're talking about as casual sex. I think that's deeper than casual sex. I would define one night stands and hookup culture as.
There seems to be...
Because it's not... It's whilst it may... There is a casual element because there isn't the same level of commitment as there would be if you were in a relationship.
It's the relaxation of the rules of monogamy to me.
Sure. But I still see that as being... You're making an emotional investment. You're just making an emotional investment that's less deep to multiple people. Mm-hmm. So I don't see that as being casual sex. I see that as another form of relationship.
But then is casual sex not a relationship then? Are you not having a relationship if you're having casual sex with someone?
That's what I think part of the problem is. Yeah. Is that you aren't having... No, I don't think you are having a relationship with that person. I think that's part of the issue, is that there's a lack of humanity to it. There's a lack of... What makes sex so special is that you are sharing the most intimate thing you could possibly do with somebody. And that's...
But that's a very traditional view of sex.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Because then there are a lot of other people who would view it as something
Two people in the moment?
Yeah, that, or there's like...
But then I still think...
Swingers clubs and that, where people go along and aren't necessarily getting emotionally invested in people, they're just going for the sexual thrill.
Sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people are after something that isn't monogamy without necessarily wanting everything that comes with the idea of casual sex. Like, there's a lot of people who do want to emotionally invest, they're just not sure they want to emotionally invest in only one person. And I feel like when we assume that all sex is monogamous or serially monogamous, I think that's part of the problem, is that we see it as that thing where you go out and you sleep with someone you don't really like and you feel a bit rubbish about it, instead of thinking, if you're struggling with the idea of a normal, in quotes, normal monogamous relationship, is that it's the monogamy that might be the problem for some people.
I think it's also a societally
because it's
a
a time in
cultural
people's
thing.
life. Yeah, it's a time in people's life where they might want to do something different.
It's the sorry.
No,
go
you
on.
go. You go.
No, I was going to say it's the for some people that's the crucial part. It's the this isn't going to work for everybody. My view of how sex is best seen in my life, how I have as healthy a relationship as I can, is viewed through that prism. But for somebody else, it could be totally different, and that's okay. That's the best form of a society that we could possibly build, where I can have one view of this. I mean, that is true liberalism, where I can have one view of this thing, and you go, yeah, do you know what, that's great, I'm glad that you're really happy. Find somebody that has the same view and live as best as you possibly can, whilst, you know, the person next door is sleeping with 4 people and they all know about it and they have a very healthy relationship and etc, etc, etc. What a perfect life. But I don't think that people properly think about, well, that's a bit of a grandiose statement, but I think that there is maybe a lack of thought that goes into the impact that sex can have on your life.
Yes, and also I think that sort of idea. Jeez.
The dog tripped over. That's all.
Florence.
I think that sort of idea of having, you know, a society where there are people who have different kinds of relationships, like monogamous ones or polyamorous ones.
Polyamory, that's the word,
yeah,
isn't it? That's the word.
It's all well and good, but I think for young people, if talking from our experiences at university, I don't know about yours, but I imagine you probably encountered similar things. People don't necessarily know what they want, or if they do, it's not defined as clearly as there's sort of a gap between single and in a relationship, and there's nothing much in between without connotations already assigned to them.
Yeah.
And that's a societal issue that lacks education.
I think some of the problem with that is that there's two extremes and there's no kind of moderation. It's a similar problem that we've discussed in law to do with the prison system, where punishment works if it's really, really extreme and harsh, or really, really rehabilitative and reformative. But systems in the middle don't really work either way. And it's a kind of a similar thing where for people who really, really want something very serious, very young, they get what they want, they have a great time. People who definitely don't want anything that anybody else has can get what they want, but everybody else in the middle is just kind of like, well, I don't really want this and I don't really want that, but this is all I'm being offered, and I don't think...
it's because society hammers these ideas on you as when you're growing up as a child. So for the people who then don't really know what they don't want to be either single or in a long-term relationship with just one person or whatever. But I feel it doesn't leave them with much option. It
requires a little bit of individual bravery in terms of because people also crave the rules. So, you know, there's a lot of people who are just on the sort of dating scene, as it were, where they just, you know, and you pull the chair out for them, and, you know, we always go to dinner and we do this and we do that, and people like the routine and the ritual and the ceremony without really understanding whether they want that, what it means, how it might make the other person feel to have to do something that's just a ritual without any meaning, or whether they mean it or not.
That's the lack of meaning to me is the real issue, and the lack of a sense of this is what I want. And that's really where it lacks for me, because that should be one of the things. Your relationship should be providing the most meaning to you in your life. I think second to what you do for a living, what you decide to do for a living, the people that you surround yourself with, the people you spend the most time with, the people that you're most intimate with, should provide the most meaning to you in your life. And if you're choosing, either consciously or subconsciously, to put yourself into relationships on a regular basis that provide you with no meaning, you're going to lose meaning from your life. And that might be, on the face of it, quite a conservative view, but then underneath, that meaning could be from going out and having sex with lots of different people. I'm not saying that is something that nobody should do, or it doesn't work for anybody. That could be your thing. But when, as you say, people find themselves in positions where they're in this grey area, where they're not sure what to do and they're kind of following what other people are doing or what they think they should be doing, that's what provides that kind of void.
It's crazy, because you think if people want a structure, if people want rules to follow that badly, you'd think they would just make their own, but they don't do that. No. I don't get that. I mean, I'm a very blunt person, so I probably do make my own rules up and not worry about what people think too much. But I need to sort of understand then the perspective of people who a bit better, the people who really feel strongly the need to please other people and follow any kind of rules that they find, rather than being like, well, I don't really like that rule, I'll make another one. Like, I think something about we're failing to emancipate young people in that way where they feel like they can make the rules, because if the rules are sort of coming from all of us, everybody accepts them. Like normal society rules, like don't kill anybody, everybody accepts that, so it doesn't feel like it's coming from someone else being forced on you. Whereas rules to do with sex are always feel like, especially to like teenagers and the child mind, they always feel like the voices of older adults trying to like press on our own ideas and on our own things. And I think a lot of the whole chicanery of casual sex is very like old. All of the rules are old and were made by people a long time ago. And why can't we just update our own?
When you look at something that I always think about in a very nostalgic view, even though I wasn't there, is the 1970s, right? Or the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
Because you can read about it and you can learn about it and you can look at the way that people genuinely felt a sense of liberation.
Like Brett in the 80s.
Exactly. But you do, don't you? You have to learn your values and your ideas from somewhere. And to me, that wasn't it's not like everybody views hippie culture as everyone was having massive orgies. Everyone was having they happened, right? But people, like you were saying, felt like they could choose the ways in which they wanted to live, and everybody was okay and supportive of people finding those ways. There weren't set rules that everybody felt like they should follow.
That's also far from the first time that kind of thing has happened in history. Like Kate was saying before about previous the state of humanity before stuff like agriculture and that, there were lots of different, well, they weren't even societies then, but that were
what was the name of the colonies where it's a name of a form of philosophy. It might be in the School of Life book. They might talk about it because I learnt about it on the School of Life
YouTube channel.
I can't remember what it's called, but they would move to these communities where it was they were sustenance communities, and they all looked after.
And they still exist
everybody
today.
Looked after
there are
each other.
some communities that do still have these healthy casual sex. I don't know what the word is really, but states.
Would you say that they were casual sex? Like, would you say that was a defining feature of them? Because it...
It depends how you define it again, I suppose, because there are... I read about, like in this book that you gave me, Kate, that is, about these societies where they would have...
Was it in the School of Life book?
No, it wasn't. It was in a different book about sex. Where they were talking about how certain communities would encourage a bride, for example, and you to have as much sex with a bunch of people, men in that community as possible to increase the chances of fertility, or is even just part of the tradition. It wasn't necessarily to do with getting pregnant or fertility or whatever. But I don't know if you count that as casual sex or not.
Is that also? I mean, we come back to the healthiness conversation. If you didn't want to be part of that community and you were being forced by these groups of men to let everybody have sex with you, is that really something that is healthy? I think my point about those colonies, those communities being formed around casual sex, but also about not even just casual sex, but the healthy having a healthy relationship with sex is the ability to make choices freely. And whatever example you look at, I don't think that we've really reached a position where...
Do you think subconsciously we've had the choice when we've been at uni or whatever or do you? Because I'm sort of viewing it as a pressure from society to have casual sex.
Yeah.
Do you think we have had that choice?
Or to reject it, or to accept it, or to... Do you think we've been... Do you think it's impacted us? Is that what you're trying to ask? Yeah, I think so. It's definitely impacted me.
Yeah, because I think it's still... Even if we don't necessarily want it, it's still... The idea is still forced on us, or at least there's pressure from other groups of people. From I don't know where it comes from. It must come from.
I don't know. This is the thing with these overarching ideas is that it would be lovely if there was a group of people going, right, what we're going to push is an agenda of everybody shagging about.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's really where it's coming from.
Is that not what the hippies did?
I think it's just over time these norms evolve through vague media pressure, through programs, through applications, education, and Go on.
Can I set the cat amongst the pigeons a
Please
little
do.
bit? I've got a kind of a chicken and egg situation. Whereas,
What came first?
yeah, sort of for me, the question, because I mean, you might not have thought about it from this angle, obviously, just like, I hate to do that thing, being the lady perspective and all, but
it's useful.
But for me, it's sort of a question of, in terms of sexual liberation, what came first, women's liberation or sexual liberation within each culture? So, like, if you notice, there's a massive pattern between people have happier, not more normal, but people have happier, more fulfilled sex lives when the women aren't oppressed. And those and we consider ourselves we're very neo-liberal today, and we're all like, oh, we're all out of the woods and everything's fine and everything. But I think a lot of the problems where we're like, why are we coming back to casual sex? I thought we dealt with this. Like, there's previous decades where they've dealt with it better. Why is it so bad? Now, to me, that's kind of, it makes me chuckle a little bit, because to me the answer's obvious, because it's to do with how women are feeling about their own. It's about, before it gets anywhere between two people, you have to get beyond your own liberation of your own body, and that kind of issue. And I think that's what's dragged us down a little now.
Yep.
Is the issues to do with and to do with like simple things like well, I mean, in my sex education class, we were like one of the rare schools that did have like one lesson on homosexuality, but they didn't like tell us how they had sex. They just sort of said some people are gay, and that's it.
Well, that's again would have been against the law too when we were in school, right? It would have still, because article, what is it, section?
Not in my school.
No, but against the law to promote homosexuality. I can't remember what the name of the law is, but Thatcher brought it in section 17 or something like that.
That went in.
Did it go pre? I thought that.
Didn't that get repealed in
the 80s? Am I thinking of?
Yeah,
I thought that was later. I thought it was way later.
It was definitely repealed before we were alive.
Was it? Oh, okay. All right, I'll take it back. I thought it was only repealed fairly recently. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Someone should do some fact checking.
Yeah, let's please do. I might
call us if you know this.
No, I think you're right. I think it, but and now not only women's rights, but also
of course it's
all
everyone.
minority rights, LGBT
How
rights.
do you get a society with a healthy attitude to casual sex if it doesn't even have a healthy attitude to half the population's body in the first place?
Yeah.
I know girls who grow up believing that they peed out of their vagina.
Well, I mean,
that there isn't
without education, there is nothing.
Just,
you know.
But it's so depressing because then they're like, well, why isn't my sex life fulfilling? And it's not your fault, but it's like you have no idea how to. If you have no idea what to do with yourself, how do you know what to tell other people to do with you as well?
Do you think that, or to what extent do you think that the media has played either positive or negative part on sexual relationships? Because I think that the impact can be. Oh, have you gone?
Yeah, I just found it was section 28, and it was introduced in 1988 and repealed in 2000.
Right. Okay.
It was an amendment to that stated that a local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality.
So.
What a load of bollocks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was obviously just before we were being. I mean, I wasn't being taught about sex at 2 years old.
No. I was only 3 then.
But yeah. Do you think? Because I think it the. Do you think the impact that we're probably going to stray a little bit from sex here, but do you think that the media has had a positive or negative impact? Do you think that the impact of the media on these ideas has been overstated or understated? I think it's difficult to tell and quantify. But
the media always has an effect.
But I think that sometimes is positive, that sometimes is detrimental. What I think happens maybe too much is a muddying of the water and a hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Look at, again, we're going to stray, but I think it's indicative of the kind of stuff that the media, especially traditional print media, does. Look at the stuff that's happening with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at the moment, and the hypocrisy of the stories between Kate and Meghan that are being highlighted constantly by the same people in the same papers. And I think that the problem is that is universal. It is done politically, it is done culturally, it is done on religious terms, and therefore people are confused about these things. There is no clear thought and ideas around these subjects.
Sure. Maybe for casual sex to be something that is healthy and possible, there needs to be equality between
definitely
all those involved.
That's why
But in that case, that also means that if the media are promoting that sort of, I don't want to say inequality, but they're not exactly painting women in the best light. If you think of The Sun or other tabloids, or even if you look at Hollywood films that are showing very bland, basic relationships between people, or obviously there are films that don't, but it's also Hollywoodized, so
all of that is
realistic?
100% true, and people are doing some excellent work with the media specifically to try and remedy things. Personally, I might be a bit of a disappointment to the cause, but the most impact on me was actually peer-to-peer rather than the media. I mean, I may be just on the cusp of being a bit before the internet era, mostly. I didn't have a smartphone until I was 16 in college. So, but for me, when I was in high school, everything was what boys would say.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that.
Everything was, but it's not just before we talk about like porn or anything like that. It wasn't necessarily that. It's going back to the point about women's own body liberation. There were the thing that was probably the most scarring to me was like how much pressure you were under never to say that you masturbated as a woman. How much, like, if someone asked you and like, everyone would be giggling and everyone knew you had to say no. Yeah. And, like, if you'd have said yes, everyone would have called you dirty and refused to speak to you and thrown food at you in the canteen. And that was part of the course. But it's not only just that, but it was so deeply ingrained that was wrong. That me experiencing pleasure was wrong. That women aren't supposed to do that. That's wrong. You can't do it yourself. That's wrong. Men are supposed to do it for you. Mm-hmm. Was I was quite young. This was about when I was 13 or 14. That's young to be, and then that forms everything else. So that when you do watch porn and it's all like, it's all consensual, they're all making money. We'll get into other ethical issues about that another time, I'm sure. But it's not the same as you taking, like, all the kind of stuff shown in porn isn't a woman taking it upon herself to do something. It's something happens to a woman. And it's just kind of it's a weird lens. A very weird lens.
You've also got to look at the way that these things are framed as well. So, like, although it isn't thought about much, the titles of the videos that people watch are very aggressive.
They're always aimed at a male audience, really.
Yeah.
And I think though also the coquettish sort of character that we're supposed to play, being like, it's this sort of thing that where people say it's your job not to let them have it. That kind of attitude is very, very, very damaging. Even more so than the one that calls us a slut for doing things is the attitude where it's like, you shouldn't be doing anything for yourself. You shouldn't be. This is something people are going to do to you, and it's your job to try and get money out of them, or it's your job to try and only sleep with people if they give you things or do favors for you, using your sexuality as currency. They feed that message to women quite a lot younger than most people think, I think, and that's how it gets there. It's not because we're just all sort of. But people's well-meaning parents do that as well. People's mums are kind of like, make sure you get a rich one, or they're like, no one's ever going to be good enough for my son, or all of this and all of that, and all of this kind of.
Or telling like, going to be a little heartbreaker.
Yeah. Oh my god, that
one going to be a little heartbreaker. And it's all well-meaning. It's all well-meaning, and I don't want to sit here and be the word police or be
snowflakes
accused of being snowflake-ish.
Yeah.
But. Those things, everything you say has an impact.
Language is important,
right? And only you can't not discuss.
Accuse other people of being snowflakes.
But you can't. Words are important. Language is important, and whilst all of that stuff may be well-meaning, it has an impact on an impressionable young kid. And if they're getting gratification by being told those things, that's going to stick.
Yeah.
You also, I think, get a lot of, or at least I think you get a lot of your experience and knowledge around relationships via your parents and via your parents' friends, adults around you. And if that's the sort of thing you're being told by your role models at a young age, you're going to follow that behaviour. And the message that's given to girls and the message that's given to young boys is very different, obviously. Can we talk about Tinder quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good
Yes,
idea.
you can.
Because my dad, my biological, and my stepmom, they're married now, and they met via a dating site.
Did they? Not Tinder, though.
Not Tinder. No, I don't think Tinder was around when they met.
Right. But that's probably quite a distinction to make because there are dating websites.
Would they have met on Tinder?
But this is why I wanted to talk about Tinder, because I think Tinder, and I wanted to make the distinction between dating sites and Tinder, because I think that Tinder...
You're not really trying to meet someone.
personifies the things that I think are negative around the kinds of relationships we have. Disposable, swiping, basing somebody's worth off photos that they manufacture and select, having very brief conversations with somebody, and it promoting hookup culture. Now, hookup culture has its place. Absolutely, it has its place. But promoting those kinds of ideas and those kinds of values, I think, is seriously unhealthy.
Yes, but I think there is a way that it... this is probably very hypothetical, and if society was very different, so maybe not necessarily very useful, but I think there would be a way for it to be a healthy platform if both parties were approaching it from different angles, as in... Because I think men go on it looking for validation, maybe because I don't want to speculate too much,
Sweeping generalisation.
Yeah, probably, but I think a lot, I don't know, from people that I've spoken to, I think generally they go on it for either for hookups, but I think there's probably stuff behind that, like loneliness and...
Yeah, for sure, but this is again, we come back
validation.
to the point of understanding yourself.
Yeah.
And understanding why you're looking for these things.
For sure.
I know
you're
that
looking for.
when I've been in positions early in university, when I was single, where I was looking to hook up with people, I know in my heart of hearts that I was doing that because I was lonely. I was doing that to then try and form a relationship with somebody. I wasn't doing it because I just wanted to, because I was sexually frustrated. To me, that belonging, that sense of purpose that a relationship brings is far more important than people thinking that I'm hooking up with people at university. In my heart of hearts. Maybe I disguised that by saying other things, but that was the reason.
When I first downloaded Tinder, when I got to the UK, that was my main reason as well, because I was lonely, because I had nobody to talk to.
Yeah, you want some company, right?
So
My beef with Tinder isn't really what you'd think it'd be. I'm not comfortable with the disposable nature of it, and I don't like the throwaway consumerism, sure. But as an app, at least it's relatively equal the way they've manufactured it, so it's not like it doesn't inherently set up the process to be like one gender choosing another one, like Love Island, where everyone...
Let's talk about that in a minute as well.
But the problem for me is the onus on people to reply, and the kind of... When I had Tinder, I didn't have it for the same reason you guys did. I had it because I wanted sex.
Yeah.
As most people do. Like, if you're really looking for somebody, you don't choose Tinder.
A lot of people don't realise that.
If you're really looking for someone, you don't usually choose Tinder.
They don't admit to that people are going on this platform because they want sex. I think a lot of people would hide behind something or would deny it.
I think the strength is in the honesty. So if
absolutely.
I think maybe they just needed to be more clear so that people could be like, this is what the app is for. We shouldn't have had any shame about it. It should have been like, this is what the app is for. If you're not into it, stay away.
Let's reiterate, there's nothing wrong with screwing about.
No.
Like, that's not... I don't think any of us are here to shame people for sleeping around.
The reason it got scary to me was because of the kind of reaction you get if you match with someone, sure, but it depends with your threshold for matching people, because that doesn't mean you automatically want to talk to them.
No. No,
But people assume that if
exactly.
they only match with like 3 people a day and you match with like 20 people a day, they're going to try and have a massive conversation with all of those 3 people. And if you've got like 20 people popping up, you only really like maybe 1. Why would you talk? But then the onus is on you to reply to these people, because they get very aggressive if you don't reply to them then, because there's a kind of entitlement of being on the app, of being like, well, I'm entitled to sex because I'm on here.
Yeah,
therefore...
and you've matched with me, and therefore you've agreed to. It's sort of unwritten consent.
I liked the look of your picture. It's not I like who you are and I want to have sex with you.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think that kind of is a bit of a gender issue, because I don't think that happens to guys as much as it does to girls.
I think that... Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say that...
Because the girl never measures you first?
No, because girls can... There's some kind of... not formula, but... thing going on Tinder where...
Oh, the algorithm.
Yeah, no, just women, I think, have more choice than men, because... maybe I'm just very unattractive and
I don't think that's
uninteresting person. But when I first went on it, it took me 6 months to get 1 match. I was in the middle of Oxfordshire, granted, and it's mostly middle-aged women / older. But
didn't you set the age range to 60 and 62 as well? Didn't you?
Yeah, I did. That's true. Maybe that was the issue. No, but the point, I think that there's a bit of an issue there as well in terms
of how
tight
you have the location on, actually, normally.
How tight?
You get more choice if you go within a wider area.
Right. There you go. That was my issue.
That's what restricts your choice. If you go like people within 1
else.
mile of me, if you look for people within walking distance of you, you are only going to get 1 in 6 months.
I thought the people in the field next door were going to be well up for it, but yeah. But I think that there's definitely an issue there with, and again, a societal issue, because of how in favour it is towards a certain gender, and because there's no. The men are seen as sex-hungry perverts, and the women are seen as picky.
Yeah, but dick pics.
So I wanted to come on to this, and I think that it creates this view of sex for guys where it's like I said briefly, you've liked me, you've swiped right or whatever it is.
Here's a dick pic.
Exactly. Therefore, you want me.
Yeah.
And if you say no, then
you've changed. Then you're changing your mind. It's not that you never liked me that much in the first place. It's that you're changing your mind. Yeah. And you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I really think that that's an issue.
Yeah.
I think it creates an entitledness.
Yeah. I think it's Tinder at fault there.
But no,
the attitude comes out other places.
Exactly. I think it exists anyway. It exists.
Sure,
if
sure,
she's talking, we're having a nice chat. She must be up for it. She must want it. That is a culture and a view that is deeply embedded in our society. And things like social media, things like Tinder, they don't create that. They bring it out of people.
Yeah.
And when left to their own devices, I think that prevails. And that comes out like, yeah, you like me, so here's a picture of my cock that you really didn't want to see. That's going to ruin your day. Like, really?
There's just...
you wouldn't just get it out in a bar.
There's a reason...
Well, some people might.
There's a reason vagina pics aren't a thing, and that reason is no less applied to the reason that dick pics shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Unsolicited.
Well, yeah, but it is as weird as just... We've just had a 5-minute conversation and then pulling it out.
Yeah.
It is that weird. Yeah. It is that odd. Nobody does that. Really?
No.
Why do you think it's acceptable just because it's online? And what it does is it creates this disconnect between people.
Yeah.
It is impersonal.
It's the anonymity,
isn't it? It also makes me really sad, because I always think they're running a massive risk, a lot of these women on Tinder as well. And you don't think about like how much of it's actually not that safe. It's so easy for you to meet someone who you think is okay, start off somewhere safe, and then as soon as you're out of a public place, or as soon as you're like, you let your guard down, like a lot of things can happen and you're not really protected. But it's kind of the dichotomy between I want to think of myself as very sexually liberated, and I want to have as much sex as I want with whoever I want, and I want it like almost instantaneously, and that's great if that's what you've decided you want. But I feel like it shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have to be unsafe for you to do that. There should be a system that isn't a crappy app with dodgy people on it for you to do that. If you like, that's how desperate people are, that they take massive risks with their safety in order to assert their sort of modern womanness and their confidence. And I feel like that's a massive problem, because then the people who are looking for that kind of insecurity in people find it very easy to find on Tinder. And there's a lot of people out there looking for exactly the kind of people they know they will find on there, because of reasons they shouldn't be looking for people. Because of reasons to do with like people's lack of confidence and people sort of being quite trusting or naive, or and there are people looking for those people on Tinder and using it as that kind of app.
I don't think that kind of hypothetical system that isn't Tinder, where people can do this safely, can find not safe sex, casual sex safely. I don't think that's necessarily possible in without change to society.
Oh, yeah, it might need massive change, but it definitely is possible, and we should all try and make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely, we should. Just to kind of, I don't want to finish on a dark note, but I want to talk about this. The amount of stories that we know and we've spoken to people about where women go to clubs or go to bars and the sort of sexual assault and the touching and all of this that happens. How can we begin to reduce that? One of the reasons why I wanted to have this discussion with you here is because I don't think me and Brett just sitting here talking about this is actually going to provide much insight.
No.
But also, I think that you provide a nice perspective on it, and not just because you're a woman, but also because you're intelligent. But what do you think? What do you think we can do to try and minimise some of this, because it is so entrenched and it happens constantly, and I've seen it, I've experienced it. We dressed up as the Spice Girls on Halloween, and we went to a club, and I've got a wig on. I was what one was
Baby
I?
Spice.
Baby Spice. Yeah. I looked fit.
You did.
I was standing at the bar, got this little mini skirt on, and this guy came, obviously it's quite dark, and squeezed my ass, and I turned round and looked at him, and the shock on his face when he realised that I wasn't a cute little blonde. Well, I am a cute little blonde.
The wig was horrible. I don't know
how he didn't realise, and like shameful, shocked look on his face, as if I was going to turn around and that be a girl and it would be okay.
As if it makes a difference.
Exactly. Well, yeah.
To the value of a human being.
Of course,
it's so crazy.
Of course. But that thing is so deeply entrenched. Yeah. How can we begin to combat that?
Well, firstly, as a little caveat for my personal life, I'd like to say that Brett does a very good job of being representative of, because I stand for no fucking nonsense from people.
Representative of what?
Of a way of being. You're just like a really good example of a way for someone to be where they're like in their sexuality independently, but you don't ever like, you're very, very respectful, but not in a way that it feels like kid gloves, or like, some people are like, oh, I don't know how to talk to people now, rah rah rah. Right. Literally just like a person. Literally just, and I feel like you're very good at that.
Let's not feed his ego too much.
No.
It's very important, because I think for me, if you're asking the question, where can you start? I wouldn't say
be like Brett.
The fact that needs to be pointed out though is so sad. The fact that just being respectful, being polite and nice, but not doing it in a patronising way needs to be pointed out and commended. And well done for doing it, Brett.
No, it's not.
No, I'm not trying to put a medal on him for being a normal person.
But it's being a gent in the sense of the word.
Just having manners.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. The fact that needs to be pointed out is so sad.
I think, honestly, if my advice, if you're asking the question, where would I point you to start in a direction, it's actually not where you might think. I would say to you, look into your own life when women have made you uncomfortable. And I would start with not standing for any infringement on your own sort of personal space, because I know I know it's happened quite a lot to you, is that like people, because if you look like a nice, soft, relatively unintimidating person, that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that happens. But it makes you see. It makes you appreciate things.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate what it might be like.
Yeah.
Because if there was one thing as a woman that I would like to explain to men that you can't in any way, it would be what it feels like to be a prey animal instead of a predator. And I feel like learning that for yourself is very valuable.
I think a lot of guys are aware of that, and I think that in a lot of ways that does impact on men's perceptions of how to conduct themselves around women, because they don't want to be seen as coming across like that. Mm-hmm. So I think the reason that a lot of guys struggle to talk to girls in bars, for instance, is because if you take the initiative to do that, you'll either be seen as being weird or well, I think maybe it's threefold. Being weird, you're already scared of rejection. I think a lot of people are, naturally. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You're either perceived as being a weirdo, what you're doing talking to me, or you're going to be perceived as trying it on. And I think that whilst I'm not saying that I'm not trying to sort of turn men into being the victims of this, but
in a bar, it's a thing of as well. The worst someone can say is not no.
Yeah, of course, it's easy to say that. It's easy to say that,
but it's a thing of the kind of people who are up for meeting someone in a bar will always be up for meeting someone in a bar.
Yeah, of course.
The kind of people who are not up for meeting anyone aren't up for meeting someone in a bar. I don't care how nice someone is to me. If someone had come up to me like when I was drinking in a bar and tried to like start a relationship with me, I just don't want to meet anyone that way. And people mistake it for something personal, and then they get really hurt because they think it's about them. If you do not want to meet someone in a bar, that's usually the fast and hardest rejections as well, is people will just be like, absolutely no way, no.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, what's wrong with me? It's not you.
It's not you.
If people will say yes if they are the kind of person who want to meet someone in a bar. If you're not the kind of person, and there's plenty of women who don't want to meet people in bars at all, and they won't ever say no to you.
There's also
they won't ever say
plenty of
yes to you.
There's also
factors.
I
don't know if that's what you were saying.
No, it wasn't, but that's true.
Plenty of other factors in terms of like attractiveness or whatever.
Yeah.
Or if the person finds the person attractive.
Go on.
I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Sorry. What I wanted to say though is to guys, I think.
Don't be a bystander.
Well, that is true, and we can. I mean, I've got a fantastic story about that, but not all girls want to sleep with you.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of rejection.
Don't be afraid of rejection, but also don't view everything. And I think this is something that a lot of guys fall into. Don't view all your relationships with girls through the prism of, does she want to sleep with me or not? Yeah. Some people just want to be friends. Mm-hmm. It's not all about sex.
And we're not possessions.
Exactly.
And they're also not necessarily going to decide that on a glance at across the room kind of thing.
Exactly. There's sort of a romanticised view.
Yeah.
But again, also, don't be a bystander. And all it takes is for one person to stand up to somebody, for other people to, and call your mates out, etc., etc. All this stuff, I think, is important.
I think watching everyone for it is really important, and I'd say that to everybody. I don't care who your friend is. If you know they don't treat the people they're with very well, if you know that about them, whether they are male, whether they are female, whether they are something in between, you say to them, with all the best of your friendship honesty, you sit them down and you have a conversation, and if you don't feel like you can be friends with them after that, then that's your friendship. But you have no business letting people abuse other people if you know it's going to happen, it has happened, if you suspect it, any of those things.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right, we're out of time, but I really like these podcasts where we sit down and just try and figure things out.
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of the whole point of the exercise. And
to
even if we don't come to a conclusion, to even start to talk about these things that are a little bit more taboo, I think it's really important.
Absolutely.
Taboo. Talking of taboo, we can't talk about it just yet. We've got exciting things coming up this new year. We're going to be branching out into different platforms, trying to do different things, and really trying to encourage people to talk about these kinds of subjects, things that aren't spoken about too much. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
But in the meantime,
more to follow.
Absolutely. In the meantime, shoot us an email if there's any topics you want us to cover, if there's any questions you want to ask us, and we'll read them out on the podcast. It's demographicast@gmail.com. Get involved on social media, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Can I just say thank you so much for having me?
Oh, you're more than welcome. You're always welcome. It's been great having you here.
It has.
Bye, everyone.
Very insightful.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.